Welcome back to No Muzzle Music. I'm Rob, and of course, joining me is Joel. How are you, mate?
I'm absolutely splendid, Rob. Yourself?
Oh, perfect, perfect.
That's what we like to hear.
Right, and on this episode, we are talking about The Streets, which, for those who don't know, is a sort of hip hop project led by Mike Skinner. And from humble beginnings, recording their debut in his wardrobe in his flat, the project has grown to be critically acclaimed and released a number of really influential albums. So Joel,
Definitely.
what's your sort of experience with the streets?
So, I absolutely love them. It's one of my Mike Skinner is one of my favourite artists of all time, and some of those albums for me, I've listened to them over the last sort of 10 years so much, and I just don't. They never tire. I find, and they feel quite timeless as well. A lot of them.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know about
definitely,
yourself, but
definitely, I agree with that. They're all very
absolutely
sort of
brilliant.
cutting edge in their own way.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, so what we're going to do is it's sort of a deep dive. So we're just going to go through the discography and just discuss it really. And also we're looking forward to, or at the time of recording, it's this Friday, the 10th of July, that the latest mixtape is coming out, which
yeah,
yeah should be a good one. We'll sort of have a little preview of that at the end as well. So
definitely.
so should we jump into it?
Go for it, mate. Yeah, fire away.
Cool. So the debut album, and probably the most cited album as the Great Street album, is Original Pirate Material from 2002.
So this is an absolutely fantastic album. It's one of my favourites of all time, and it's made a massive impression on me over the years, and it's been quite a big part of my musical journey, which I've discussed in the episode prior. So if you haven't watched that, give that a watch. Um, this album, obviously, like Rob mentioned, was mostly recorded in Mike's house in his bedroom that he was living in at the time, and he recorded the vocals in his wardrobe, soundproofed them by using his mattress, which is pretty DIY. Don't get much more
Oh, so
DIY
it's
than that, I wouldn't have
punk
thought.
as it gets, really.
Very much so, mate. Yeah, and yeah, this album is just a big sort of homage to the '90s UK garage scene, really, with just a sort of Mike's twist on it, I guess. And what I think is quite interesting about this album is it's definitely a cult, one of those cult sort of albums, isn't it? Because you talk about it being quite well cited compared to any of the other records that have been put out under the streets. But it initially peaked at 12 in the charts, and then 2 years later, in 2004, it hit its highest point of number 10. So it never got any higher than 10 in the album charts, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it's not until the follow up that was when the sort of mainstream success really came
Yeah,
for the streets. But at the same time, it was nominated for the Mercury Prize at the
of
time, and it
course, yeah,
and every greatest album of all time list under the sun has it in at some point,
100%. Yeah, definitely. I just
and
think that's quite
rightly so.
interesting
Rightly so. Yeah,
because
yeah. I
it
suppose
wasn't
it.
a debut that burst onto the scene, if you like. I mean, obviously we were probably too young at the time to actually have been around to experience it, but it would appear from that it didn't necessarily burst onto the scene quite like you would think. When looking back at the album now, I think it's one of those ones that, due to what Mike did after, that gained him a slightly more notoriety. And I think when people back at his discography, this is the one that really echoes everything that he's about. It's because it was 2 years after the album was released that it got its peak. It peaked place at number 10 in the charts. It wasn't initially that was the case, which is quite interesting in itself.
Yeah, and I think the sort it's such a unique album
Yeah.
in terms of just Mike Skinner himself and his delivery and his lyricism.
Mm.
It's so beautifully British, and I think he sort of
Oh,
made
100%.
made quite a big statement on that album, which a lot of people at the time were sort of trying to imitate this US Jamaican sort of
Yeah,
influence in their inflection when they're rapping, and Mike was having none of that. He's just planted his flag and he says, "This is what I am. I'm not an
100%.
imitator,"
I mean,
and he wasn't.
No, exactly, and I mean, he's quite. This is a quote from him. Is that is that he kind of wanted to keep that really authentic British sound because, and like I said, this is a quote from him. Is that all UK hip hop at the time sounded like someone from Reading trying to sound like Biggie or Q-Tip,
Yes, yeah.
and that's just this was Mike's sort of way of just keeping it gritty and British, and I think it didn't really gain any traction in America, and none of his albums have really. I mean, they got a bit of recognition, but nothing serious. But I think it's purely because they just don't get it. It's so authentically and quintessentially British that even for the sort of Anglophiles, it like the slang that's used is very, very British. It's not like it's not like some of the grime and drill music and stuff that you get today, where it's like sort of slang that is a little bit more relevant. It's like really old fashioned, like East End sort of stuff, like geezers and birds and that.
Around
and I
here,
think
we say birds, not bitches.
Exactly, and I think in the US it just didn't do anything for them. They didn't get it.
I think within like a track of listening to it. Well, for the record, the opening track, "Turn the Page," is one of the greatest of all time in
100%.
terms of opening tracks, and
What
I'll die on that hill. But
it's written about the Gladiator as well.
It is. He's sitting there watching Gladiator, and he's like, "Right, I'm going to do this."
That is the most Mike Skinner thing ever. That though, imagine
him
just sat there
like, just immediately, you're just struck by how British it is, and it's all about going to the kebab shop and having fights in the pub, and
it's just beautiful social commentary, really.
And that's
isn't it?
sort of he finds beauty in the mundane, and that in particular was really influential for a lot of bands to come. I mean, like you talk about when people talk about
I mean, it had been done before by bands like Specials and Blur and stuff like that, but it kind of just feels like this is a far better use of social commentary. It just feels slightly more refined and a little less cliche.
I remember when people talk about the Arctic Monkeys first album, because that's around a similar topic of sort of nights out and stuff, and people are always praising that. They always say how it's sort of like just commenting on mundane things, and that wouldn't exist without this album.
No, 100% not. No. And I think no one really. I think Mike mastered that lyric style unlike anyone had done previously, and I don't think anyone's been able to do anything anywhere near as good in that vein since. And I don't think they will. I think the thing his way with words is kind of unrivaled, really.
Oh, the humour he's got is
it's brilliant.
Like tracks like The Irony of It All are just hilarious.
I mean, that I wanted to touch upon that because that's actually quite an interesting one. That because of the songwriting technique. I mean, it's essentially, those of you that don't know, it's Mike Skinner. He's having a conversation between two different individuals that represent both sides of the coin, I guess, for 20-something-year-old males in the UK club scene at the time, the drinkers and the stoners, which I think is quite ambitious, but it's unbelievably executed. Like that can so easily go wrong.
Absolutely. And he sort of, for the rest of the album, it is very much Mike Skinner. And then all of a sudden, he just pulls this rabbit out of his hat, and he's playing these two completely wildly different characters. And it's really compelling to listen, because we've all met people who are like both sides of that. I just want to touch upon his actual manner of rapping as well while we're here, which is a thing that extends for a lot of the discography, and sort of later on it's less so, but the way he raps is like so most of the tracks are like 4/4, as most of the tracks going are in Western music, and a lot of the time in hip hop people try and stay within that, like they will have their bar within 4 beats, and it will stick between that, and then they'll have a slight breath and then start the next one. But Mike sort of just overlaps in between them, and will take breaks sort of halfway.
He'll take random pauses, won't he?
And then it will continue into the next one. It's really
a lot of people were to try it, it wouldn't work.
No, it doesn't sound quite. It's
not cohesive.
The first time you hear it, and then the more you listen to it, you think, actually, this is genius.
Yeah,
doing it. And he's
Yeah,
given it this sort of lackadaisical ramble. He's not trying to sound hard or anything when he's rapping. He's just sort of delivering what could be a stream of consciousness if it weren't for
exactly.
be so perfectly observed
Mm.
and phrased.
It does feel like structurally it should be a complete mess, but it's not. It's the complete opposite. It feels like it should be absurd, but yeah, I think he executes that extremely well on this album. And one thing as well that needs to be mentioned is the use of strings on this album. I think it's absolutely
Oh,
brilliant.
definitely. There's very
And
much a cinematic feel
yeah,
to this
especially in
album.
Turn the Page, where the strings rising come in, and you can just hear these strings just come up through the song. I mean, it's absolutely great. And also, It's Too Late is another one that's got brilliant use of strings on it, and it gives the album a real sense of depth, I think, which stops it being this kind of UK garage throwback. It's got more to it than that. Although these beats on the whole, although the album's not exclusively so, a lot of these beats and instrumentals, they are UK garage beats, quite in quite a homemade sort of style. And I think
Yeah,
it gives the album a little bit more complexity.
there's a little bit more character as well because he's not just trying to imitate
Yeah,
what has gone before him. Like I said before, he's sort
it's
of putting his
channeling it,
own.
isn't it?
Yeah. He's using it as a reference point
Yeah.
and then putting the street spin on it.
The songs aren't made with the whole sort of club dance floor thing in mind. It's very much sort of like an underground flat party, really, isn't it? Like that's kind of what it says to me. And I think it gives the album that sort of pirate radio feel, which then leads to the title and the cover, which is a photo of Kestrel House. It just makes it all fit so tightly,
Yeah,
and
it
it
very much
works so
has
well.
the vibe of a bed sit rather than a festival.
Yeah, it's that whole pirate radio thing, isn't it? I guess, and like that's the feel you get from the title, the music, and the cover. And this is a great cover as well. Like, we don't often talk about covers on here, do we? But
No,
it
definitely
is an
is.
iconic album
But
cover.
it's a uni building, isn't it? It's like
It's
uni campus.
it's Kestrel House, yeah, Kestrel House in it was taken by a German photographer. But yeah, it all fits together so nicely. But I think on the whole, it's a funny, dark, heartbreaking, but inspirational album from start to finish,
100%.
I
I
think.
think it gets a lot of praise, but to be honest, I don't think that's quite enough praise. This album
No, I'd
is
agree.
magnificent and it's a must listen. Right, and how do you follow up an album like that? Well, Mike Skinner did it with A Grand Don't Come for Free from 2004. And as I said earlier, this was the Streets' most successful chart entry. Well, joint most successful. It went to number one. And it also the single Dry Your Eyes went to number one, which is their only number one as well. And this was, I think, the lyricism and storytelling of original Pirate Material was very much confined to the individual songs, and that was brilliant. But
Yeah,
it got taken a step further with this album because it's a concept album.
yeah,
And Mike Skinner said in his book, The Story of the Streets, that he learned to sort of write from script writing books,
yeah.
sort of from Hollywood filmmakers and stuff. So that seems like quite a natural progression.
That was a big thing for him, and I guess that makes sense as to why when we thought the Streets were all over in 2011, that was what he wanted to get into was script writing and
Yeah,
film and TV. So that's obviously been a big interest for him, and like you said, very relevant on this album.
yeah, yeah. It's sort of quite
It feels like
rare.
episodes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like each song feels like an episode in a series.
Yeah, and it's all very bookended really nicely as
Yeah,
well. It's basically about him losing a grand and then doing a few bits, finding love, losing love, finding his
yeah.
grand in the meantime.
Oh, we'd all like to find £1,000 down the back of the television,
Oh,
wouldn't we? I
100%,
think, but
100%. Dry Your Eyes was the biggest song off this, as we just said. And it really is like it's a highlight for me personally in terms of this sort of heart-wrenching rap song that it is
yeah,
quite a difficult art to pull off, I
yeah,
think. And obviously it's a great song, but in terms of the context of the album, when you listen through it and you get to the story, it makes it
it's very
100
succinct. Yeah,
times more effective, really.
yeah. No, definitely, and I think also "Blinded by the Lights" is I'd say probably another one of the big ones on that album. But I think this is a great album. It's a great album, but I don't think it would have. The record would have reached number one without Fit But You Know It, Blinded by the Lights, and Dry Your Eyes. I don't, because I think it's a little bit too concepty, the rest of it, and a lot of the songs aren't particularly linear.
No, I think, I mean, obviously there's a reason why every single's chosen as a single. I think you couldn't have any other songs off the album as singles, as standalone sort of entities.
No. And I mean, songs like Empty Cans, they kind of feel like a musical audiobook.
A little bit.
I don't know whether that's something that lends itself to doing particularly well in terms of chart success. I mean, I think it's great, but I don't think it would have, without those three really big tracks, I don't think it would have done as well in terms of commercial success.
No, probably not. But at the same time, it does have those three singles and
exactly.
Wonderful songs that hopefully got, or obviously did get a load of people to listen to another great record.
100%. I think it's not similar to original Pirate Material, but it kind of carries on in a similar kind of vein in terms of the delivery. The instrumentals on the album are generally quite bare and minimal when compared to original Pirate Material. I think, anyway.
Yeah, it does have the impression of sort of more. I like what you said about it's feeling a little bit like an audiobook at times.
It feels like a musical audio, but
it feels like the music's almost just a sort of background vessel to carry the story.
It's accompanying the story, yeah.
A part of the story, which again, going back to the irony of it all, the dichotomy of the two sort of backing tracks that it has are as important in telling the story of that song, which isn't necessarily the case on all the tracks on A Grande Free.
But I quite like that though, because I think that means when you're listening to it, you really there's no crazy drum fill or bass line or something that's drawing your attention away from the words.
No.
Because I don't think it would be as effective otherwise. Because if you've got some like proper, some tune that you put on in the car and it's a right groovy sort of number, but the crux of it really are the story that are being told in the lyrics. It just doesn't really seem to work that well when people do that. If you're placing so much emphasis on telling a story so carefully in your words, then I don't think it's as effective or worthwhile if you're having a real like banging, slapping sort of beat to accompany it.
Yeah, I'd agree.
He's found a really good balance on this album, I think.
I think, I mean, hip hop concept albums in general are quite rare, and good ones are even rarer. And I think he's still pulled it off.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, he carries on this sort of unique style of social commentary on the record that we touched upon with the last one.
Yeah, it's just going into a bit more detail. It's almost as if he's extrapolated one of the original Pirate Material songs into a full sort of 45 minutes.
Yeah. And he really skillfully represents the trials and tribulations of a young bloke learning how the world works, really, with relationships, girls, money, friends, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think like the first record as well, it's just incredibly relatable. And he was criticised with this record, with it feeling a little bit rigid at times in terms of the flow. And I think that might go back to what we were talking about with the music being quite minimal and it accompanying the words. But I mean, in my eyes, someone that would criticise him on that basis, they just don't get the streets. It's not their cup of tea, because it's what you spoke about with original Pirate Material about how he leaves pauses and the delivery slightly offbeat and stuff like that. Like if you're having a problem with that, which I think he was criticised for it, then I think the streets just aren't for you. I wouldn't say it was a fair criticism.
Maybe if you were listen to it out of context and not know that was the sort of style of it,
that's
you might think this guy needs a metronome. But
yeah.
But I suppose once you're,
but that's what it's about.
Yeah, I think that's just sort of his very unique way of doing things.
So I've heard this record referred to as rap opera or hip opera.
Yeah, that's generally the term for a hip-hop
quite good, isn't it? Which is, I mean, for anyone that don't know, it's basically just hip hop music with a real sense of drama to it. But I think it's quite fitting. It's definitely, I'd say, I like that term hip hop. Right,
Yeah, it's a good
start creeping
portmanteau,
that in, I
as they say.
think. Yeah, 100%. But yeah, it's a great album. I don't think it's as strong as original Pirate Material,
I don't
but
think I think
nonetheless,
there's a couple of tracks on here that aren't completely garbage or anything, but it's not quite just tune after tune after
no.
tune that original
But
Pirate
I
Material is.
mean, how it's so hard to pull off a
Yeah,
record like that. It's
I
got to be.
think
I
to do
mean,
that as your second album and try and
I
attempt
like
something
it.
like this is a very admirable feat, and he's pulled it off regardless.
Yeah,
And it's
I
definitely
quite
worth
like
the time.
the ballsy move of going for a slightly non-conventional concept album like this as a second album.
Yeah,
Bearing in mind, he didn't even hit number one, like we mentioned. He only got to number 10 at his peak.
exactly.
And I think that rise to number 10 coincided with the release of this album. So this must have drawn quite a lot of people in that then decided to listen to the debut, original Pirate Material, and obviously
Yeah,
the
that
rest
would
is
make a
history.
lot of sense. That would make a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. So this must have drawn people in. But I mean, one thing I will say about this is I hope Simone's happy she's got a platinum record written about her, to be honest. Whoever she is.
Definitely, I'm sure she's regretting getting with Dan.
Well, yeah. Bloody Dan, eh? Bloody Dan. The nation hates you, Dan. So if that makes you feel any better about yourself.
Uh, so with the first two albums, the Streets have made it to the big time at this point. They've been quite successful, and then it's time for that a traditionally very hard third album.
The tricky third album.
Exactly, which was the hardest way to make an easy living.
Mike Skinner started to venture into making slightly more singy tracks on this album compared to the previous two, and yeah, this record's just a bit of an evolution for him, really. And it starts off really strong with the song "Pranging Out," which vocally and instrumentally is very, very good. But whilst maintaining that kind of trademark sort of Streets lyric writing style.
Yeah, I think that sort
And
of sets the tone, doesn't it? It's a very dark song for a very dark album.
yeah, it sets the tone really nicely, really nicely. And after this track, however, I think the album gets a little bit more philosophical, which is something that he's not really done before. Like he kind of, I mean, everyone touches upon it to a certain extent in lyric writing, but it does feel like there's emphasis placed on it with this record.
He's taken a hard look at himself, I think.
Yeah,
And he's sort of getting the fame, and he's getting sort of the women and the drugs and all that sort of stuff. To obviously, which he had anyway, as you could tell from the first two albums, but to more of an extent, I think it's sort of starting to eat him away a little bit at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
it really does. Like, there are points in this where he does just seem in a pit of despair.
100%. 100%. And I think this record, this is my second favourite Streets album, and it means quite a lot to me. This album, I think it's absolutely sensational. But Mike was quite heavily criticised, like cuttingly criticised, for being this sort of bemoaning star with loads of fame and fans and money and stuff, and which I think is utterly ridiculous, to be honest. Because I mean, what do you want him to do? He opened up on a number of occasions about his struggles with his mental health, especially during the heights of the Streets. And you're always told to write about what you know. And I think this album is quite honest. And Mike really exposes himself in quite a vulnerable way. I mean, and there's no doubt that the music industry, it's not a conducive environment for someone's mental health. It's not at all. And I think this album's quite important for that, though, because it really talks about it. And it's so easy to go, oh, you've got everything, you've made it, you've got all this money, you've got a decent car, you've got loads of people that want to be a friend, but they don't talk about the really difficult patterns. So, you're doing a gig and you don't go on stage until 9:30, and then you've got to do the performance, and then you've got to do all the PR stuff, the club nights after, and doing that relentlessly. It's not good for you, especially when you're surrounded by people that are just trying to give you drugs and stuff all the time. And that's the kind of thing. I think it's quite important to talk about, because it's something that's talked about quite a lot now, especially if you're studying music or wanting to get into the music industry. It's something that people do touch on, is that you need to be careful with your mental health and how it can quite easily take a turn for the worst in this industry. But I mean, I think it's really important that Mike voiced this on this album.
Well, I
And
think
like
it,
us,
sort of, it's quite an overarching topic in conversation now in 2020, but
but it wasn't in
it
2006
wasn't
so
in
much.
2006 exactly.
No, and I think now, I think you probably get quite a lot of slack yourself for criticizing him for what he was trying to put forward. Because I think it wouldn't be people would think, hang on a minute, like yeah, he may be living this sort of glamorous life that you'd love to have, but the grass isn't always greener, you know? And people kind of fail to, I think, take into consideration all the other complexities around that. All these people that are trying to be your friend that I don't really want to be your friend, and you don't know who to trust. You don't,
Yeah,
you know, you're constantly surrounded by people, all the drugs and the alcohol and everything's encouraged, and you're encouraged to be this sort of scandalous sort of rock and roll star. And I don't think that's always a good thing. But yeah, like I said, like, so this is a quote from Mike, and he said this during his hiatus, which was post 2011. And this is a quote from him. He said, "Every day in the streets was scary because you feel totally out of control. You just feel anxious, paranoid, and there's just a feel of general fear. And that's just how my 20s were. And I think, Jesus Christ, is that clear on Pranging Out? Good God, like that song just
yeah,
summarises
and
that
you can't
perfectly.
help but feel that that's probably more that probably happens to more people than you realize as well. It's just they're not
Yeah.
all perhaps brave enough to make an album about it.
No, and that's the thing. And it kind of been plain sailing for him because I mean the bloke's seen as the epitome of a geezer, you know, a man's man. He's with all the lyrics and stuff and the image that he
Yeah,
put
yeah,
out across.
and if he's sort of acting out and all this sort of shit and partying and whatnot, it's just part of his image
Exactly. And it can't
and
have
how
been
he
easy
sort of
for him to
presents
express
himself. But that
these
does
themes.
take a toll.
Exactly. And it can't have been straightforward for him to express these themes of vulnerability on the
No.
record, to be honest. And
But,
Never Went to Church is a great song as well. And it's a tribute to his dad. And God, that song's so sad, man. Like,
mhm,
what a beautiful
yeah,
song though. Like anyone who's ever lost like a family member that they were really close to will tell you like how accurate this song is. And I think it's just the bit. This is the bit for me where he's like, the lyrics go like, Mum says me and you are the same from the start. I guess then you did leave me something to remind me of you. Every time I interrupt someone like you used to, when I do something like you're on my mind all the way through because I forget you left me behind to remind me of you. I mean, that is just wow, man. That's really, I think that's so powerful. Like there'll be so many people out
it's,
there that
yeah,
relate to that.
yeah, definitely. It's
I'm not going to start reading lyrics out from this album all night. Don't worry. I just think
yeah,
that's quite a poignant one.
it is.
Um,
It's very poignant, and I think what I found quite interesting about this album is that the percussion is very different from the first two albums. Like
yeah,
I don't think it's got anywhere near as much of a garage sort of tilt to it.
I think it was a bit. It's a natural progression, really. You know, I
Yeah.
think
And he's sort of experimenting a bit more. There's electric guitars in
yeah,
War of the Sexes and that continues sort of a little bit more for the next couple albums as well. It's sort of more of a well there's less he could have made on his computer and he's sort of more branching out to more
yeah.
organic sounds.
It does kind of feel like he's trying to find his voice outside of the garage music, and I think it's why it wasn't as critically acclaimed despite reaching number one. Is I think that it's quite organic and it's a little bit more explorative that musically than anything he'd done previously. And I
Yeah,
think it's why it's even though it hit number one, it's not mentioned in the same vein as original Pirate Material. Is because I think it is very much him finding his journey and. He's obviously got his proteges, the Mitchell brothers, on the record as well, which give it a different dynamic, which is something that he's not really got involved too much in before.
yeah, he was never really one for sort of in any intense collaboration or anything.
No,
Which
it's very much him, isn't
to
it?
mention is why the upcoming project's quite exciting. But we'll
Definitely. Yeah,
touch on that later. But I think for me, I think Mike Skinner's at his best when he's observing, and I don't. There's
yeah.
not too much of that on this album. Uh,
I would argue that though. I'll finish what you were saying.
well,
Sorry, mate.
I mean, there's sort of it's more of an observation of Mike Skinner rather than an observation of Pete down the pub. And I think
Yeah,
personally, I know you've said it's your second favorite. Personally, I think it's one of the weaker Streets
That's
albums, which
interesting.
isn't to say it's
Okay.
bad at all.
No,
I
no.
still think it's definitely worth your time. But I think in
Yeah.
comparison to, it doesn't quite hit the heights of the first two albums, at least for me.
Not in the same way. No, I think it hits height differently.
Oh, 100%. It's a whole different. His sights are set on a different target for this album,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's
No,
got to be
one hundred
respected.
percent. And I think he stays really true to himself on this record as well. And he's not trying to do what too many artists do, where they're still writing about this working class life that they once led, which obviously he wasn't at the time of the record. And I
Yeah.
quite like the fact that, because that's the thing as well. Like, you can't keep doing that. You know, after you become successful, you can't on your fifth album still be talking about
Well, it becomes,
living in your bedsit with your
at that
and
point
struggling.
you're basically making it up.
On the Ground Don't Come for Free, it's he's talking about his struggles and him kind of learning about how the world works and seeing things. And I think this album, he's 2 years older, and he's had the opportunity to experience more. And I think it's observational on what these struggles are actually like, rather than the album prior being about the struggles and being involved in them. I think this is observational in a sense of it being observational of what comes of these issues and what can happen, because it's a little bit kind of reflecting back on things, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's rather than looking at what's in front of them, it's sort of looking
It's
backwards.
retrospective, isn't it? I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. It was a really interesting slant to
I
have.
think it's a great record on the whole. I think it's absolutely brilliant. But it's not gonna. It's there are people that are avid Streets fans, and they're just more about the kind of more UK garagey kind of tracks, and I think that's cool. That's one thing about the Streets as well, is that you can like these different styles. You don't have to like
Yeah,
it
I think
all.
it's very. I mean, it's not like he's sort of picking a whole new genre with every album or anything. We can't all be King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard, but
very much not.
yeah, I think all of the albums are very unique in terms of the discography and what they bring to the discography, and I think this very much has its place as the sort of introspective album.
I'd completely agree. But for me, I mean, this is a big one for me. So not for everyone, but definitely for myself.
So yeah, next up is 2008's Everything Is Borrowed, and this is a real sort of left field move for the Streets, I think. I mean, Mike's come out and said he for this album he tried to move away from the sort of referencing modern life that he sort of built his reputation as being very, very good at observing, and he's sort of going for this more sort of grand scope of big ideas and yeah, it's different. It's different to the rest of the discography. Like, what do you think about it?
Well, he opts for a full band lineup rather than beats, like bedroom beats and stuff, which I think is what makes it more different than any other feature. It is my least favourite Streets record, I must say, because I'm not saying it's bad, but I just think it's my least favourite, because it starts off and quite philosophical, like some of the songs are on the last one. But I think I do think that he's honed in on the singy style slightly more, and I think it's a bit more accomplished in that sense. But I don't think the songs are anywhere near as poignant, and it's certainly more upbeat in tempo than A Hardest Way to Make an Easy Living.
Yeah, I think that's what he was going for. I think he wanted to make a sort of more positive, positive album.
I mean, he said himself that it's a peaceful coming to terms kind of album.
Yeah, yeah. I do agree with
7.
you. It's probably one of the weaker efforts that they've done.
I'd say so, and I think the fact that it peaked at number 7 in the album charts, although this doesn't really mean a great deal, we've been talking about it, but it doesn't mean a great deal, but it kind of does at the same time. And I do think it kind of reflects the fact that this is the Streets' weakest record, having the last 2 hit number 1. I think people weren't quite so engaged by it. And lyrically, I don't think it's anywhere near as strong as anything he'd done previously either. But that's quite difficult. And I guess and that's me looking at it, I don't know, maybe someone else would say something slightly different because I'm looking for a slightly more authentic street style of lyrics. And maybe this is him discarding that and
Well, I think
and
it's
doing
things that he hasn't quite taken on before in terms of
I
the
think
sort of grand scope of life
yeah
and existence and I don't know if he's quite found how he wants to express things on this album. I don't think
no
it's quite in the Mike Skinner voice. Not to say that he has to layer all of his metaphors in bottles of Stella as he has done in the past, but yeah.
I think though occasionally this does cross the line slightly of being a little bit cliche at certain points. It feels a little bit overly motivational.
Yeah,
and
I'd agree.
and a little
I'd
bit
agree.
preachy, which he's not done before. And I think the fact that he's normally quite relatable and on the same page as the listener, which is something that I think appeals to a lot of people. Him not doing that and being a little bit more sort of preachy on this album, I think maybe was slightly detrimental. I don't know.
I think what it is that he's sort of he up until this point he had always been such a unique voice in British music and in music, and I think in sort of adopting some more sort of cliche themes, it's disappointing, really. From it's not what you expect.
No,
it's not what we've come to expect from him.
Yeah. No, I'd agree. But some of the tracks are, I guess, also quite lullaby-esque, really. Especially like The Strongest Person I Know. I mean, that might be the harp in it, but it feels like a lullaby a little bit.
Yeah.
Which again is not something that you'd really associate with the Streets. Again, but there's nothing wrong with doing something different.
I think it at the very least it continues this theme of Mike Skinner constantly taking risks, and
that's got to be applauded,
and not being complacent in just doing what his last number one did, which really is what you want from an artist. And
no, 100%.
You know, whether it comes off or not, it's got to be applauded.
The risk taking's got to be applauded, and also. It might sound like I'm coming down on this record like a ton of bricks, but I'm not. It's just I want to try and look at it slightly critically, just due to the fact that I absolutely adore the rest of them so much that I think it's quite important to make this seem like it's not some sort of.
I think it comes from a place of high expectations as well.
Yeah, I think so. But one thing that is worth bearing in mind is I mentioned obviously about it only hitting number 7 in the album charts. One thing that is worth bearing in mind is that 33 albums that year hit number 1.
Yeah. Which
is quite a few different albums. So there would have been a lot of competition around. You know, you had Rainbows by Radiohead, you had Amy Winehouse, there was all kinds of stuff like that maybe stopped it from getting as high. Because although the Streets have had some real commercial success over this, they've always remained a kind of cult phenomenon.
Yeah, they're not someone that you hear on the radio. Do you know what I mean?
No.
They're not sort of. Well, I mean, as I was speaking to my parents about recording this video earlier, I said we were doing about the Streets, and my mum goes, "Who?" Like, I think it's very much. As you said, it's very much a cult band. And that's not to say they haven't had success, because they have, but it's sort of more of an underground sort of thing.
Yeah, it's not like a Foo Fighters, if you like. You know?
No, exactly.
No, definitely. But it's a great album and definitely worth a listen. But I don't think it's as strong as any of the others.
And speaking of it, sort of not wanting to do the same thing over and over again, he's taken another left turn here with 2011's Computers and Blues, which Mike's always said that he's wanted the Streets to be a sort of 5-album box set sort of thing. He wants to be quite self-contained, and that's an idea he's had from the start.
So yeah, this I thought was going to be the last album, and we all thought that up until about 6 months ago. To be fair, we still felt like this was the swan song of the Streets, and I didn't think the new album was going to happen after this. I didn't see it coming, even when he did those tour dates a couple of years ago, and he put a new single out here and there. I certainly didn't think there was going to be a new album coming, but there is. So it's interesting because you can talk about this in two ways, really. You can kind of talk about it as it being the last of that box set, if you like, or it's the fifth of six. I mean, it's a difficult one because
I think we have to sort of treat it as. I mean, the man said it himself. He wanted 5, and I think this is very much intended to be the last we'll hear from the Streets, and you can sort of tell that.
Yeah, it's got a send-off kind of feel to it, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's sort of got this varied instrumentals throughout, and one thing we haven't mentioned about the Streets is that the production has always been impeccable.
Yeah,
and that is very much himself. Yeah, and that's very much the case here. And personally, I feel like it's sort of it takes a bit of the best of each Streets album through here. If you look at something like ABC, it's got the sort of the nimble lyricism looping in and out of the bits from original Pirate material. Something like We Can Never Be Friends is basically Dry Your Eyes Part 2. It's and
it's almost like a sort of a conclusion.
Yeah, and it has got. I mean, I said it was taking another left turn. It is very much got an electronica feel to it, which has been fleeting. There's been moments of it in some of the earlier works, but from the opener, there's sort of this little glitchy sort of thing that comes in every now and then, which we haven't really heard from the Streets before.
No, and Mike worked quite closely with his friend Rob Harvey from the music on this record, and I don't know whether that's something that probably played quite a big part in the reason that that's the case. One thing that I will say about Rob Harvey, though, is that his voice on this album is absolutely sensational, especially on songs like Soldiers. His voice just sort of pierces through the beat and just brings the song into a different stratosphere. He's got quite a unique voice, isn't he? Like it's very high pitched, but not irritating.
I would agree.
It's really pleasurable to hear, and
I think it's always pleasurable to hear Mike sort of toing and froing with a more sort of traditional singing vocalist, like he did with Kevin Trail.
Yeah.
Sort of throughout the earlier works.
Yeah, Kevin Mark Trail's got a great voice as well. Fantastic voice.
I think that's
he's always carefully picked people that he's worked with, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's quite an iconic thing of the Streets, of the sort of most successful work at the very least. There's very much a to and froing and a tandem, which again we'll sort of get onto it, is something that he's coming back to a little bit.
100%, and for me this is definitely the most intriguing record that Mike's ever put out, to this date anyway. But it's like you said, it at points is definitely a real nice throwback to the debut. And some of the sounds, I think they're quite awkward and clunky and glitchy, like you said, at points. But he somehow just creates this wonderful blend with it, like especially with songs like Without Thinking. And it's far less philosophical than the previous two albums. He's not trying to put forward these mad concepts, but he does have a good time poking fun at the internet age and social media on tracks like OMG, which I think is great as well.
Yeah, definitely. It shows he's still got his eye on sort of what's happening and current events and whatnot.
Yeah, no, definitely. He pokes fun at the ridiculous nature of social media and parts of this album. But yeah, I think that gives it a real strength. And I think the BPM on this album goes all over the shop as well. Like 1 minute the tempo is quite slow, and then the next minute it's fast and disjointed, which makes it quite a captivating listen because it's not particularly linear in a sense that one song kind of blends into another.
I think this is a really intriguing listen, and I think it's up there as one of the better Streets albums
Yeah, I'd agree. It's
for me.
probably third for me, I guess. I don't know. I don't want to rank them, but yeah, it's a really strong album, and there was a little bit more of a break between Everything's Borrowed, Computer and Blues than there were on any of the previous.
Well,
and it
yeah,
does
the
kind of
sort
feel
of the
like
first 4 albums all had 2 years between them, and this one
every
had
2 years.
3.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
It's nice. It's a really nice album, and it's something that really you don't hear get mentioned at all when people talk about the Streets.
no,
The
not
four
really.
previous get talked about, but it almost sort of sometimes when you talk to people about the Streets feels like this album doesn't even exist, which
Yeah,
I think is really strange.
It's a shame, really, as well, because it's fantastic.
I'd agree, and I reckon this is probably more how Mike Skinner would like his music to be. And I think that's quite evident from the singles that have been put out for this new album, is that I think that's more what he wants to do. Although Original Pirate Material was definitely the best record and the one that everyone absolutely loves. I don't, maybe at that point in his life, the whole UK garage, he was 21, 22, wasn't he? When that
I think that was probably a
So-
case of him trying to not replicate, but him being very much influenced by what he grew up with.
Yeah.
And I think as he sort of matured and he started to experiment, as we've seen throughout the discography. And personally, I'm quite excited for the new mixtape.
Massively excited.
None of us are getting out of this life alive. And yeah, we've had 3 singles, 3 or 4, I think.
I love the Tame Impala one. I'm not too sure about the others, but the one with Tame Impala I think is great, and I think it really works, to be honest. And that's not something I wouldn't have thought that Tame Impala and Mike Skinner on a track would work quite so well, but it seems to. And Mike seems to be capable of anything, to be honest. So I think we should expect quite big things from this record going on.
Yeah, I think from that track in particular, there's, again, like we said, there's very much the tandem of the sort of the very dedicated singing vocalist sort of providing a refrain for Mike to come and go from.
100%. And I like the feel that there's going to be some really interesting tracks with features on this album. It's always something that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite publicised, the sort of variety of people he's working with.
Yeah, I mean, the Idols in particular will be quite interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, we spoke about this. How's that going to work? Is it going to be Mike Skinner vocals on an Idols track?
That's
in terms
what
of guitar?
I think it's going to be. That's what
I think so, because I think if it was Joe Talbot's vocals on a Mike Skinner thing, then it would be the Streets with featuring Joe Talbot. But
yeah,
I don't know. I'm interested. He's also got Jimothy Lacoste featuring on the album.
Yeah,
so take what you will of that. Who knows how that's going to turn out? That in itself is quite an interesting selection that definitely deserves a mention, because he's obviously someone that Mike feels will add to the album. Now, with Jimothy, I mean, I don't know if anyone's that familiar with any of his stuff, but the songs are all quite tongue-in-cheek, and it doesn't really, at times, if you looked at his Instagram page and listened to his songs, you could be forgiven for thinking that it was a joke.
Yeah.
Like, it almost kind of has that sort of satirical feel to it that he's taking the piss out of.
I think Mike's always had this sense of humour with these sort of things, though.
I think he gets it. Which I think it's quite interesting.
Even if it does happen to be a joke track or something, I feel like that's not out of character from
No,
the
definitely
Streets.
not. Definitely not. And I think maybe Mike gets the humour of the tracks and thinks that, I guess there's similarities there, but I just think it's quite interesting that he's chosen as a feature on the album. I think that's quite an interesting thing, and I wonder what that song will be like. I'm hoping it will be quite a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, but we won't know until
we'll find
Friday,
out this Friday. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I never thought this album was going to come, so I'm ecstatic. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah,
absolutely ecstatic. I think it's going to be a big one, to be honest. But yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, I think that just about sort of brings us to the end. Obviously, let us know in the comments what do you make of the Streets? What are your favourite tunes? What are your favourite albums? You can also contact us on social media. We're always up for a chat if you want to get in contact there. Yeah, so we'll make a Spotify playlist of the albums we've been talking about and the new singles as well, so you can get a feel for what the Streets are about if you've never listened to them before, and if you have never listened to them before, make sure you do. It's very much worth your time. And yeah, if you enjoyed this chat and you enjoyed what we're doing, give us a like, tell your mates. All helps us out at the end of the day. So yeah, we'll see you next week. Thanks, Joel.
Thanks very much, mate. And just one more thing. I hope you guys are always excited for none of us are getting out of this alive as we are.
Oh, very much so. Very much so.
Because I'm buzzing. And I think it's going to be a good one. But thanks very much.